I'm a romantic. We are here to talk about Moonknight. And if you have not checked out his channel yet, I would highly recommend it. I will leave a link to his channel down in the description below. But yeah. So I guess this is the first time both of us have ever done something like this.
Not correct. I've actually done a few discussions with other people, but this was like years and years ago. But I'm finally glad to be able to talk with someone about one of my favorite shows of recent memory. So,
Yeah, yeah. Wait. You've done this before, like about like discussing like movies and shows and stuff?
oh yeah, absolutely. I those who know me fairly well, I started doing something with a group of people back in 2016, and that never panned through. But we did a couple of reviews on there, including ironically Doctor Strange.
Cool.
So yeah, it'll be fun to do it again.
Yeah. We weren't recording this, but we were just talking about Multiverse of Madness.
We were, yes.
After I had to deal with the snake problem at my house. Um, so yeah, this is just going to be a little bit of discussion. I would recommend you just sit back, do your homework, do your work, whatever you're doing, and just let this play in the background. And we would love to hear what you guys' thoughts are on Moonknight down in the comments. And let's get into it here.
Absolutely.
I think the best place to start is like, where do we think Moonknight ranks in comparison to the other shows that Marvel has done so far?
I guess I'll start personally because I have very hot takes on the Marvel TV shows for the most part. But for me, easily number one. I've watched
100%.
pretty much all of them. The only bits I didn't get to watch was like about half of the What If show.
Yeah,
I did catch the Doctor Strange episode in that, which I did love, but
yeah,
the rest of it was okay. And for me, like, we'll go into it more of why I really love this show, because I know that you have an excellent video on your channel talking about Moon Knight to some varying degree.
yeah,
And it's been really hard for me to get hooked on Disney Plus Marvel content, to be honest with you.
yeah,
I really loved Loki, even though it did have a fair share of issues. It was pretty adventurous in what they were trying to do. And I also did enjoy Hawkeye quite a bit for, like, you know, that kind of buddy cop comedy sort of thing. And Christmas time setting is always one of my favorites for any media ever. So like those were really, really good. And I got a lot of enjoyment out of that. But for me, I think the standout of their storytelling is got to be Moon Knight so far.
yeah, yeah. I think I said it in my review where I was like, the other shows, they all did at least one thing that I liked. Like, I like WandaVision because it's trying something different and it's exploring the characters of Wanda and Vision. I liked Loki because it's exploring more about what makes Loki work and it's introducing the concept of the multiverse. Um, I liked Falcon and the Winter Soldier when it was like more focused on being like grounded and more realistic, like what we can relate to type stuff. And then I liked Hawkeye because Hawkeye was just a nice breath of fresh air um, from like, the multiverse, the cosmics things all going on in Marvel. But I think aside from Loki and Moon Knight, I really can't say that I would like go back and watch any of those shows all the way through. Like I can go back to like at least one episode of WandaVision maybe, but like I don't think I'd ever watch it all the way through again. And same thing goes for like Falcon and the Winter Soldier and um Hawkeye. But Moon Knight and Loki, I think, are the two shows that I would say I'd go back and watch all the way through again.
Hmm. Yeah, I ended up rewatching each show so far twice,
Hmm.
because I would stay up till like 3 a.m. because I'm a night owl and catch them when they dropped. And then my family would want to watch the shows too because they're very much interested in the Marvel stuff as I am. Um, and a few of them I definitely think have been more enjoyable. Like Loki, I thoroughly enjoyed watching that twice. I was really picking up on a lot of more details in that show on a second viewing, which was what you hope to get out of anything ever as far as media goes. And then obviously Moon Knight, I felt the same way. But like shows like WandaVision and Falcon and Winter Soldier, I watched them twice, and I agree with you. I don't think I ever have like that obligation to rewatch it again. Like there are definitely the penultimate episode of WandaVision is one of the best in Marvel television for sure. But like outside of that, I just don't have the interest in re-exploring those stories. Like I feel like I get what they were trying to go for, although I really don't actually take that back. I don't know what Falcon and the Winter Soldier was trying to go for, but I get what they were going for, and the two viewings I did, I think that was plenty given the content. So
Yeah, yeah. I guess that all that being said, I think that that kind of brings me into like what I'm kind of wondering is, do we think Moon Knight carries any of those same problems that we've talked about from the other shows?
yeah, I would. I know that this is the first time for us, but I would like to go heavy into spoilers on Moon Knight here, if that's
Oh,
okay.
this is 100% going to be spoilers.
Okay.
If the
Yeah.
show's been out for a week now, spoilers are off the table.
Yeah, because I think we really need to talk about some of the stuff this show covers.
Mhm.
I think for the most part, there really isn't a bad episode. I thought that the third episode was probably the weakest for me out of all
Uh,
the episodes, but that's saying a lot because I still think it's much better than most other Disney Plus TV episodes so far.
mhm.
Um, but yeah, I totally want to go into stuff about the show, um, just the passion behind creating this show, which is like abundantly apparent. Um, on top of like the Egyptian representation, and I'll go into kind of some of my background with that stuff. But I think there's a lot to discuss with the show.
Yeah, I do have to agree with about the third episode probably being the weakest, because I think the opening of that episode, when we get like our first hint that there's a third personality going on, I think that was cool. But then the middle chunk, when they're like dealing with like a black market deal up until they go to like turning back the night sky and all that, that's the part that I was like, I feel like a lot of this could have been shortened or probably even cut to a certain degree,
Yeah.
especially that the fight scene at the black market deal, because it was like Marvel's proven that they have very good CGI, but like I don't know what it is about the CGI in that fight. It just looks kind of whack at parts.
Yeah.
Um, but I also am gonna add to what I think the show. I think the finale. My problem with the finale is I didn't need giant Khonshu and Amit fighting. I feel like I was like, when I was watching, when it was cutting to them, I was like sitting there and I was like, I'm getting WandaVision finale vibes right now, where it's just like you had a good thing going, but now all of a sudden we have a sky laser or a giant kaiju monster. And I'm like, guys, we don't need to end every show with this. I like the Moon Knight versus Hero just fine. I just didn't need the giant kaiju monsters.
Yeah, I love you mentioned like the big laser in the sky thing because I was watching that with a buddy of mine from Australia. We did the watch party feature on Disney Plus at like 3 a.m. in the morning, and normally like that stuff bothers me. Like I don't like the giant end of the world sort of like something's going on in space or they're altering the night sky or something like that. But for me, it was so absolutely absurd seeing two Egyptian gods fight each other in a kaiju form that I have to disagree with you. I absolutely loved it. It was one of my favorite moments of the finale. Like it's such a bonkers thing to do. It reminded me of Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, but I just found it a lot more fun with that kind of idea of just having like these giant beings, wrecking the Pyramid of Giza. Yeah, I don't know.
So,
It's
so you
fascinating.
like the concept?
I loved it. I loved how I don't know. Like I hate honestly, I hate that end of the world concept. Like
Yeah.
what you were talking about, I usually hate that in these superhero things. Like it bugs the hell out of me that we have so many world ending events happen within the MCU. Like it's honestly we can't even count it on our fingers anymore. It's just gone way past that.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, like I just thoroughly enjoyed the creativity of that in this show, and I think that really stems from the fact that uh, Egyptian mythology has always been something that's deeply intrigued me.
Hmm.
And I'll go into it more later, but what got me into this kind of form of media and like just my love of film and stuff is history.
Yeah.
And like for me, I was about 8 years old, and I was really into ancient Egypt. I would watch like these documentaries on like the History Channel and National Geographic. I knew like by name like these Egyptologists who were well renowned at the time, and I would keep up on the Egyptian discoveries in archaeology, like all that, and then like Indiana Jones was stuff that really like cemented my love of history, and it eventually became one of the biggest reasons why I became a storyteller
Hmm.
and why I like to do stuff about film and film history. So I I believe there's like a very strong part of me that leans into the bias of that because I know all these gods from ancient Egyptian mythology, and we'll go into more of like what I thought the show did really expertly about some of the Egyptian myths, but I think that was a huge selling point, and that's a reason why I've always been attracted to this character, especially because I remember I really got into him around 2012, and it was around that time or a little shortly after that they were really revolutionizing the character. Like he was far different in the modern age right now than he was back in like I believe the he was introduced in maybe the late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah, he got introduced as an antagonist to Werewolf by Night, I believe.
Okay, yeah.
And that's where he was first brought in. He kind of has a similar like backstory to um like the Punisher because both those characters were supposed to be one-off villains that were just meant to be like, oh, we're gonna be a pain in the butt to Werewolf and Spider-Man, and then we're gonna be gone. But then
Mm-hmm.
people just latched onto them, and then they were like, oh, people like this concept, so let's just take it and run with it. You can actually I think it's episode one. There's a QR code you can scan in the background, and it'll give you a free comic of like his first appearance.
Yeah, I do remember hearing about that. Yeah, but
But
yeah, it's just such a fascinating character for them to even touch. Like I was so excited to hear that they were going to make a show based off him because most people before the show had never heard of him at all.
oh, I was excited because I love Moon Knight. He's one of my favorite like niche Marvel characters, and I was so excited for this show because I was like, if this show can prove to everybody that this is not just Marvel's ripoff Batman, that's all I want the show to do is just be like, he's not Batman in Marvel. He's a little different. But then people just see the gadgets and they're like, oh, it's Batman. And I'm like, it's not. It's not.
Yeah.
I'm like, he's a magic dude who has an Egyptian bird deity living in his head. Like, no, stop calling him Batman.
And on top of which, he actually is insane, which is something that Batman has not really been ever. So
I mean, to be fair, I think there is an argument to be made that both of them do have dissociative identity disorder.
yeah, but I think yeah, but it's far more extreme in this case than it is ever in like the Batman comics sort of lore.
Yeah, I, yeah. I just started getting into Batman, so
Yeah,
I know
you
that he like refers to himself as Batman even when he's talking to himself, and I'm just like, oh, okay. Sounds like you got some DID going on, but you do you,
it's
Batman.
a little bit. He has a little bit.
it, I, well, since we're talking about now that we've gone into the whole dissociative identity part of the show, I think one of the best parts of the show was seeing how Oscar Isaac portrayed these different personalities, even if he is only doing two of them throughout a majority of the show.
I wholeheartedly agree with that. I was like, I knew, look, Oscar Isaac is an incredible actor.
100%.
I was actually I was surprised and not surprised that he was tied on board for Moon Knight.
Mm,
Like I heard that casting and I thought, oh, this is kind of perfect. And I'm also kind of surprised that he accepted the role, especially after Apocalypse, which was kind of a mess. Kind of a mess.
yeah, yeah. I was like, although we just kind of then, if that's the case, we got to add him to the roster of people that have portrayed one comic book character and didn't go well, and then
Yeah.
like he's up there with Ryan Reynolds, Chris Evans, and uh, who else had? Who was the
Uh,
other one?
Michael B. Jordan
Michael
would
B.
be one.
Jordan.
Yeah. Mhm.
But yeah, it's just I didn't think he was going to go back either. And it's like when I first heard the casting, because I was like, if they ever do a Moon Knight movie or show or whatever, my pick was personally Daniel Radcliffe,
Really? Okay.
just because I've seen him like in. I watched that Guns Akimbo movie where he's like an insane dude that has guns stuck to his hands.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And I was like, I can kind of see that portrayal. I was like, I can kind of see him playing Mark Spector as like a huge dork or whatever. But then I was like, so when I heard Oscar Isaac, I was like, eh. And then I started thinking about it. I was like, that's actually really good casting.
It really was. And for me, I love that we're kind of talking about kind of like our thoughts going into the show because for me it wasn't Daniel Radcliffe I was thinking of. I was thinking Keanu Reeves would have been a great pick for this role. I thought the because he is Lebanese, so he is like part of that world. Um, and like the John Wick stuff, which I believe they took a lot of inspiration for that in like the combat sequences,
Yeah.
especially towards the last episode, which I thought definitely had the best action of the whole show. I don't know
Mm-hmm.
if you agree with me on that, but
Oh yeah. The scenes of him, Layla, and Hero was probably the best action sequences of the whole show. I agree with that. It was just again the kaiju stuff that still bothered me. But
no, I think that's fair. I think that finale, from what I gathered, it was kind of hit or miss with some people, and I get where you're coming from with it for sure with that like kaiju fight. Like it definitely feels a little bit overdone sometimes and out of place.
mm,
Uh, but again, I mean, I think it'll work for some people and it won't work for others. And uh, trust me, it's not my favorite part of the show at all. Like I
yeah,
think there's so much more that Moon Knight does so well that like the action stuff is like it's perfectly passable. I don't think it's anything like monumental as far as like Marvel action or even in the genre itself. So
Yeah, yeah. I guess my biggest thing with the kaiju fight and why I personally wasn't really a fan of it was because there it's um Egyptian boogeyman and God of the night sky duking it out, and I was like, I feel like that they could have had like a more creative use and showcase of both their powers instead of just like it's WWE WrestleMania.
yeah, no, I agree. I do agree, but um, I don't know. it is kind of fun to see these giant Egyptian deities just kind of like duke it out in a way. Like it's so absurd when you think about it.
It is absurd, and I will say I am glad that with these like a lot of these shows and some of the movies now that Marvel is more leaning into the absurdity
Mhm.
because I think that's what makes the comics so fun is just how absurd they can get. And it's like I think I credit Guardians of the Galaxy for making it okay to be weird in these movies. But
Mhm.
now that they're like getting into like Moonknight and like Taika Waititi directing Thor, it's like they're just turning that weirdness up by like 100. And I think that's I am glad that they're not afraid to get weird, but I don't want them to lose like that creativity of like the powers and stuff and how these characters use those the powers that they have.
I agree with that. Like I like yeah, there's part of me that really enjoys seeing the gods part, but also yeah, there was like a lack of skill sets with that, which I think we saw more of that down on the ground level with Mark, Layla, and Harrow.
Mm-hmm.
But like Amit, like the real thing they were showcasing with Amit throughout that episode was just the soul sucking stuff,
Yeah.
which is unique to her, obviously, and kind of fuels like the kaiju size thing. And then, like a small detail I did love about Khonshu in the show, and I think it was a little more apparent in the finale for me, was how he kind of teleports. He kind of phases like the way the moon phases. If
Mm-hmm.
you notice that, like if we had more of that like creative look and skill set, I think it wouldn't be nearly as much of a problem when they did a kaiju fight like that to have them kind of really showcase what they're gods of.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
he is the god of the moon, and it makes sense for him to have the powers that he has in the show. But it would also be kind of cool to see a little more stuff applied to that, like take that concept and go a little further with it.
yeah. Yeah. I like I think we got a good show of how powerful Khonshu is in the end of episode 3 when he's like, turning back the night sky and also in the beginning when he does an eclipse just because he can.
Hmm.
I thought that was cool, but I feel like I would have liked to see more about how like all I was asking was like have him chuck a star, an exploding star at Amit. Like that's all I want to see. Just have them use the powers associated with them.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess that's kind of hard with Amit because Amit technically isn't a god of anything. She's just kind of a boogeyman.
she kind of is. Um, she, she might be kind of like a god of punishment sort of thing because something that they really heavily emphasize in the show is the journey of the dead, and kind of how in Egyptian lore the soul goes through these trials to then get weighed, and then that weighing leads to either you go to a pleasant afterlife or you end up like going to like basically avoid like land, which is kind of what the duat is
Yeah.
in this show. And then for like the extremely evil, their hearts would be devoured by Amit, which is literally straight out of Egyptian manuscripts and whatnot. Like um, in the tombs, which by the way, this show did an excellent job with set design, especially with the tomb episode. The way that they structured the tomb and kind of the layout of that and how they displayed the burial chamber is so on point with how those tombs actually are. I think there was a bit of promotional material for the show that Disney Plus had like released on social media, and they had brought in an Egyptian historian as a consultant for the show, and I think that really translates over to a lot of the authenticity of the Egyptian culture in the show.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I do I was reading up on like how they went into writing and directing the show and what they wanted. Like one of the things I read was the director whose name I always forget. I am not good with keeping directors in mind.
Mohammed Diab, is
Mohammed
that it?
Diab.
Yeah, the showrunner. Yeah.
Yeah. I read that like he watched Wonder Woman 1984 and he was mad at that like how they portrayed Egypt yet again as a third world country and all that. And then he was just like, I'm going to show those people how you really do Egypt. And biggest thing that he
Mm.
did in Egypt, and the show got a lot of praise in episode 3 for showing, how modernized Egypt is, because it was like in a lot of media, and like I was trying to think back to that too. I was like, have I ever seen a movie or show where Egypt wasn't a third world country?
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, no, this is like the first time that they did that, and I was like, that's good on Marvel. I'm proud of you guys for doing that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think just Egyptian representation in general in this show is absolutely huge. I can't honestly think of a piece of media in the like past 20 years or so, or even longer, that's really given this much love to the culture and the people there and the landscape. I mean, it's very much a show that's that represents them well. I think we get um, I think we get a lot of times lost in the Arab stereotypes, and I think Mohammed Diab really does a great job of breaking away from that and portraying these people in such a great light that I don't think we've really had before. And I
Yeah,
think the Marvel medium is one of the best ways to do this sort of stuff. Like I don't think representation is always done well in superhero stuff in the MCU especially. I
mm-hmm.
think I think a lot of times they're trying so hard to have representation that I think it kind of falls flat. Um, I like to point to Eternals because it is a fairly diverse cast, but it doesn't ever feel like they're respecting any of the cultures or anything. Like it's just kind of just to have it at that point. Whereas this, it feels very rooted in that part of the world, and um, it showcases in the storytelling and the visuals. Um, Another thing that we haven't even talked about yet is the soundtrack to this show. Absolutely slaps. It's
Yeah,
easily one of the best of the Marvel Disney Plus shows.
yeah. I think I do agree that like Eternals, I think tried way too hard to be representative especially, but I guess that's a lot of that has to do with the fact that they introduce so many characters and we never really get a chance to really get to know any of them. Um, I think I personally think that Marvel is making steps in the right direction, especially with this show and stuff like Shang-Chi.
Hmm.
I think they're making a good effort, but they do need to not do what they did with Eternals and try to like shotgun a bunch of characters and hope some of them stick. I guess that's what I think that they did with Eternals.
Mm.
Um, and I think that's when they do take a slower approach. Like I'm really looking forward to the Ms. Marvel show. Just because it's like it being a show will give us a chance to like see more of what makes Kamala and like her culture and what it's like for her to be Muslim in Jersey.
Mm.
Um, I just personally like it better when they do slow down and actually let us get to know these characters and their backgrounds. And yeah, Moon Knight for sure did that.
Yeah, I think having because if you look at kind of like the cast list for the show, um, the big one is obviously the actress for Layla, but most of it is like Egyptian actors and actresses, which I have to respect
Hmm.
like a great deal. Um, because I do love having Oscar Isaac in there, even though he's not Egyptian, and I do love having Ethan Hawke. I was the biggest supporter of having Ethan Hawke on this project because I absolutely love everything that he's in. Um, but I think just casting all around in this show is definitely one of the better parts of this piece, and definitely one of the instances in the past few Marvel projects where I feel like, yeah, this was absolutely perfectly done. Like I don't see how they could have done a better job in that department.
Yeah. Well, and I think a big part of why this show does so good at like improving what Marvel has done before is it's very unconcerned with connecting itself to the rest of the MCU. Like I can think of two references off the top of my head that they make to the larger MCU, and they're
Hmm.
both like passing lines of dialogue, and it was like a truck in the background that had the organization from Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And I think that this show really benefited from like this is a story about Moon Knight, not Moon Knight and the other superheroes in the world,
Hmm.
and just don't even worry about what Hawkeye is doing. Don't worry about what She-Hulk is going to be doing in her show. Just this is all about Moon Knight. Let's focus on him.
Hmm.
And I think that's what really lent to the show getting to develop the world um and characters in the way that it was able to.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It was, I think, a major turnoff for a lot of people right now is this kind of MCU fatigue. And um, I think everything being connected all the time, I think it gets on people's nerves these days. Back in the day, it was such like a magical thing
Mm-hmm.
um, for the MCU to do. Like it was, no one else had really done it to the scale that Marvel was doing it at the time, and it was such a cool thing back in the day. But now we're at the point where I think people are afraid that, including myself too. I don't want to sound like I'm excluding myself here, but people are afraid that that's becoming the priority over good storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Moon Knight is answering that problem because it feels the most disconnected of any Marvel anything since maybe maybe the first Iron Man, to be honest with you. Like it has no larger agenda within the MCU.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like I as much as I do like getting to enjoy a story without having some random cameo show up and it's like I don't what's Black Widow doing here? I don't need you here right now. I want to focus on Moonknight.
Mhm.
Um I do think that there is a place because at the end of the day, what makes the MCU special is that it is this sprawling universe where characters can interact with each other. Um, I think that there is a way to do it. In recent memory, I think Spider-Man No Way Home and Loki are the only ones to have managed to pull off having cameos um, in them that service the story and do like propel the story forward. But I do think that sometimes Marvel does end up going um, like Falcon showing up in the first Ant-Man movie. He didn't need to be there. You could have cut him out and it doesn't change the story at all. And yeah, I think that sometimes Marvel does get too reliant on having cameos just for the sake of having a cameo.
I agree.
But I do think that there is a way to do it.
There is, and I think films like Civil War for me, like that's a Captain film, but it does such a good job at also being a better Avengers film than the one before. And then you get these like interpersonal conflicts with each member that it feels like it earns the connectivity at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's such an event sort of thing that I respect the connectivity between all these major franchises. Like that when it came out, and it's still one of my favorites within the MCU, was such a huge event, but it honestly works super well for even it being like the end to a trilogy and like the last of like um, Captain America focused films.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's saying a lot because personally, uh, Cap's my favorite within the MCU. As far as like the grand characters go, but I respected how they were able to explore. And again, it's not like any masterpiece of cinema, but they were able to really flesh out a lot of people in that movie, despite having a large cast with it, which I think outside of like the Avengers stuff and maybe Guardians, I think the MCU has a hard time really exploring multiple characters in one movie.
Yeah, I agree that I think they do have trouble with um like doing multiple characters at once. And like you said, I think Guardians did a good job because James Gunn knows where to put the focus. Like the first Guardians is very much all about Star-Lord and um the other characters you just get like inklings of who they are. And then Guardians 2 is more about who is Star-Lord, Nebula, Rocket, and Gamora. And then I've heard that the last film is going to be all about more about exploring specifically Rocket and Drax. Um, so it's like I think they do manage to pull off um, multiple characters and exploring them. It's just very rare. I, but I also will say I do prefer it when we get like Iron Man 3 or um, Captain America: The Winter Soldier, where we get to really dive deep into what makes each of these characters tick.
Mm-hmm.
And like when it gets to be them specifically and nobody else.
I agree for sure. Um, which I guess will lead into talking about Mark Spector and Stephen Grant here, because I
Yeah.
think that's kind of a good transition.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and geez, what a fascinating character slash characters. I was pretty aware of the DID stuff within the comics and the multiple persona angle that they were going to go with. I knew that, well, watching the show, they do play it a little differently than the comics
Mhm.
in what each character kind of represents,
Yeah,
but just the exploration of this is such a fascinating thing for Marvel to do, and a really, honestly, ballsy thing because I don't really think they've really handled a character like this before. I mean, this is one of their most deeply tragic characters, I think.
yeah, yeah. I really liked um I really liked the dynamic between Steven and Mark. Um, Mostly because I like how it starts off as very earth shattering to Steven to realize that he's not the only person living in his body.
Mm,
And I like seeing how they kind of they bicker like brothers up until the time that they're able to like actually like physically interact with each other in the Egyptian afterlife.
hmm
And then they at that and then like but after that experience and like finally fully understanding each other and where they're both coming from, they finally develop that like not brotherly antagonist but like brotherly love by the
hmm
end of it.
Yeah, I think I don't know. We haven't really discussed episode by episode a whole ton. Um, but I think we can both. I'm going to assume that you and I both think that episode five is probably the best piece in this show, and
100%.
yeah, and easily one of the best episodes of Marvel television ever. Um, episode five is an absolute gut punch of an episode. I ended up watching it twice, and each time it just absolutely floored me. It's one of the best character explorations in Marvel ever.
Yeah.
Like, it is such a deep dive into what makes Mark Spector tick, and it fills in so many gaps that the show had very open at that point because we had no idea what the backstory was with either of those characters. We got like tidbits of it, and that episode we really get to see not only some of the stuff that they were talking about, but also these very traumatic events that happen throughout Mark's life.
Yeah.
Because much like in the comics, Mark is definitely the main host. It's his body, and these personalities are being born out of Mark and Mark's trauma.
Yeah.
And yeah, go ahead.
Well, like with like episode 5, I when I heard that they were doing Moonknight, I was like very curious to see how they would handle DID and how people who have either treated or have personally dealt with DID would react to that.
Mm-hmm.
And they're saying that like what I've been seeing from a lot of people with those kinds of backgrounds, they're saying that like the whole personalities being able to talk to each other is very much just like it's fluff to make the story happen. That's not really how DID works. But then
Mm-hmm.
they say that like the best thing that the show did was in episode 5 when we see how Steven developed in Mark, in that DID develops with little kids going through severe trauma and then they just kind of create another persona to escape from that reality.
Mm-hmm.
And they like when that episode aired, there was a lot of the people that I was following was saying that, like this is like the best representation of how DID happens.
Yeah, I agree. It's very in that episode especially they take away there is a there is a mythical element to that episode for sure. They're covering the trial of Osiris, and you know his soul is basically getting judged, and that's basically the whole plot of the episode. But we outside of like the interactions with them kind of walking through um getting to each of these memories, most of the like the events that they're witnessing in the past, Mark and Steven like are very disconnected from each other's awareness,
Hmm.
which I think, like you said, it really plays into that authenticity. And there's such a rawness to that episode in those flashbacks that I wish Marvel would do more of. We really get like a it's man it's even it's just hard to talk about. It's such a highly traumatic thing, and I love seeing all these memes about how the mom is like the greatest, you know, villain in all of the MCU and the most disliked character. But I mean, to be honest, it's the one of the most real villains in the entire MCU. Like we talk about Thanos and we talk about Killmonger and Loki being these great villains, but in this case, it's so real, and I think a lot of people can easily relate to it and also be frightened by just how common that this possibly could be. Like this isn't something that's, you know, otherworldly or fantastical like Marvel gets. This is a very deep and real world issue.
Yeah, yeah. We we've heard like people praise um we've heard people praise like Eric Killmonger or Adrian Toomes as like villains in the MCU who come from like a very real place and you can understand where they're coming from and stuff like that. And like when I say real place, I mean like they're coming from something that we deal with in our world. But then they also have, you know, the Black Panther super strength and the giant wingsuit made from alien technology.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas seeing um Mark's mother, all she has is that this is what some people deal with their parents and stuff like that. And so for her to make that kind of level of impact as having such a big impact on Mark and Steven and who they are, I think says a lot about the writing of um, Mark and his background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something pretty new for the MCU in general is
Mm-hmm.
handling such this is such a different trauma than I think we've had with other characters. Um, I really love talking about Thor and how he's dealing with all this loss and whatnot. I think he's been really well developed the past few films he's been in, which is saying a lot because that was such a meathead character at the very beginning of the MCU. And now I don't love him as much as others, but he's becoming this more well-rounded and complex person.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think even that comes close to what we got in episode 5. I remember it's been a few weeks since I saw the episode, but the scene where he goes to his mother's funeral and he doesn't exactly go to it, he's just standing outside of it and he just has like this breakdown in the street is I don't know, it was just like you're watching it and it's nothing like what they've done before in the MCU. It's such a just gut punching moment to see basically a trained mercenary completely cave in on himself at that moment.
Yeah, and then to like kind of go back to when we were talking about Oscar Isaac's performance, that was one of the few times in the show that we see him transition between Mark and Steven without the weird like, flashing effect that they did in like episodes 1 and 2 and part of I guess also in the last episode.
I would like to talk about that flashing effect here in a second, if you
Yeah,
want to continue what
yeah,
you were saying.
but yeah, it was like that scene of Mark breaking down at his after his mother's funeral, and then like how he switches into Steven. Um, they did do a little bit of like a sound effect to indicate that he had switched to Steven, but honestly, it's like the way that Oscar Isaac does the mannerisms in that scene, like you didn't need that sound effect. You know right away that he switched to Steven.
He does it in such a visual way, like the way he would transition from Mark to Steven is so apparent in just the facial mannerisms. It's really an incredible performance because we really haven't had an MCU character that's, like two of the same actor sort of thing, like we've had in this. So he's
Yeah.
got to do double time. And it's very much, I think they even said this a lot in um, with Ethan Hawke and Oscar talking about the show, how much it's an actor's show. Like
Hmm.
it's just this is just a perfect chance for these actors to like really go deep into what they can do well. And I think in that regard, it's one of the best pieces of Marvel media just as a showcase of talent across the board. I
Yeah.
mean, it's really like not a whole lot like this. I I would even say that honestly, Oscar Isaac was born to play this role. He does such an excellent job with this character and is so true to everything that makes the character tick that it will go down as one of the best MCU outings for sure. And
Yeah.
I think seeing people's reaction to this show who weren't like huge Moon Knight fans before is just incredible. I mean, there's so many people that are latching on to this character that would never have ever in like the comics or anything like that. And I think we'll talk about more of like what the potential is for Moon Knight to be seen in the future. Um, I'm hoping that there's another season, but we're not really sure of it at this point. But I think the outlook for Moon Knight going forward is one of the best outlooks for any MCU character right now. Because I
Yeah.
think we're at a weird point where we have a few old characters still sticking around, a lot of new, and it's really feeling to me, other than like maybe Spider-Man, like it's very hit or miss
Mhm.
as to how we're going to handle things going forward if we're Marvel.
Yeah.
So I think Feige Feige hasn't done as well in Phase Four as he has in other phases, but I think he has a grasp of what he wants and what he's doing still. So I trust that whatever vision they have at the moment, and again, they plan out like 10 years in advance with this Marvel stuff. It's insane.
Yeah.
Um, I have a feeling that there's still going to be some good stuff. Like, I don't dislike all of what has been introduced in Phase 4, even though it's definitely not my favorite.
Yeah. I think for me the thing that helps with phase 4 is you kind of got to think about it as the new phase 1 where they're still building stuff up and getting stuff in place because it's like the Infinity Saga is done and a lot of the characters are done. They're gone. And now we kind of have to like repopulate the universe with new characters
Mm.
before we can really start getting into more of the like everything is connected and everything is leading toward secret invasion or Secret Wars or a lot of secrets. And um so yeah, I think, yeah, a lot of stuff in Phase 4 is hit or miss, but I think it helps if you look at it as like it's a new start for the MCU and it's just another Phase 1.
It is. It definitely is because Phase 3 really just after that was done, it basically was like a hard reset.
Mm,
And I think there's a bit of a magic loss between Phase 1 and Phase 4 as far as startups go. I think Phase 1 had a little bit more in its favor at the time because this was a new thing. But also, I think some of the ways that they introduce characters in Phase 1 was much more storyteller friendly.
mm,
I think they just knew that they really had to flesh out a basic understanding of these characters without like really going all out on different elements and the zaniness factor. Like as long as they deeply explored the hero, and if they happen to have a good villain like Loki, um, they would be fine. But um, it's something I don't think Phase 4 has nearly as much of a handle on.
yeah.
Loki has been established since Phase 1, and we've already like the fans absolutely love him. I love him, and we already have this love for him going into his show that definitely created more of a bias. Um, and I think we had a little bit of that with the other shows as well, but they're also trying to introduce all these new characters in it as well. And not all of that really lands. I did like
Mm,
Kate Bishop quite a bit. I think she's a very likable protagonist. And it's the same, I feel the same way about Yelena from Black Widow, even though that movie is an unholy mess of a film. Um, but we just need, and again, we're privileged to even have all this Marvel content right now. Um, it's truly a time to be alive if you're a superhero fan.
yeah.
But I think we also have the right to want better, uh, better media from anything.
Yeah.
I think we have to strive to create things that can be, they can be fun and zany and adventurous and whatnot, but we also need them to be kind of good too. Like we want good explorations of characters. Um, we don't want Morbiuses. I mean, um, it's just I hope that we can get to that because shows like this really highlight that there are people out there that want to create media that is very emotionally complex and like intricately done, and also at times extremely whimsical and daring.
Yeah.
um, and I think that at the core of Moonknight is what makes it such a great show. There's so much character work here across the board that really elevates this from most Marvel properties. Um, I think No Way Home did an excellent job with that. I was actually quite surprised with how well that handled the Tom Holland Spider-Man, and I think that did of all the things of Phase 4, this and No Way Home really feel like the best in terms of characters
Hmm.
and just how well rounded they are. But yeah, I really hope we get more of this going forward. Like I'm a little uneasy about some of the projects that Marvel has lined up right now. Um, but hopefully things, like I'm looking forward to Echo quite a bit. That sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
We just got an announcement today that we're getting more Daredevil, which I think
Oh
is
yeah.
an excellent, excellent piece of news. So hopefully we can really lean into that stuff here in the next few years.
Yeah. I Yeah, I think we're kind of that was kind of a start to our closing remarks, mostly because
Mhm.
we're also about to run out of time on the thing that we're using that will let us, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Why don't we hold up one sec? Well, before we kind of close out, we should talk about Moon Knight going forward, uh, and specifically Jake Lockley,
Yeah,
because
so we talked about you mentioned earlier about like talking about like if Moon Knight should get like a season two or not.
mm,
I personally feel like if they did a season two, I would be fine if they just did like an hour and a half special to wrap up the Jake Lockley stuff because he's really the only thread that I feel is left from this show, especially since the post-credit scene killed Harrow and now we don't have an antagonist and outside of Khonshu, I guess. I
I
do want to see Moon Knight again going forward, but I also don't really know how well he could at the state that he was left in the show. I don't know how he could really his story could really continue, especially since Steven and Mark are now on good terms.
and I have a few thoughts on that here real quick because I think this was a good. I liked Harrow as a villain just enough. Um, I don't. I wish they kind of had done a little bit more with him,
Yeah,
but I honestly think, and again, I don't think Moon Knight himself is not exactly a pristine, superhero either. He's got a lot of skeletons in his closet, and um, the tactics are definitely a lot more violent than anything like Batman or Daredevil would be. Um, but I think what we could see going forward is the enemy being more of like himself.
yeah,
Like having Lockley be there is such an extreme end to the personalities of Mark and Steven. And I think we could really get a season where we see them coming to conflict with that side of themselves and making the realization that, oh, that's, you know, that's also a part of our personality, and maybe Khonshu is, kind of like a force of evil in that regard. Um, and then another thing that I think we could see is Randall Specter. I know that in the comics he's got a big presence, and he even becomes at one point a warrior for Khonshu called Shadow Knight.
yeah,
So I think if they do a second season, I feel like more so with than most of the other MCU Disney Plus stuff, they have a lot of depth to explore, and I would hope it still continues to be, at least for the character of Mark and Steven, more of an inward look at themselves, because there a lot has been solved between those two personalities, but they still have a lot of inner conflict, even with Jake Lockley, which is something that I think they could really explore going forward. And even if it's not a like a second season, maybe you lump it in with something including the Punisher, like Daredevil. I
hmm
mean, any of the New York-based operatives that Moon Knight's been associated with, I think would be really cool to see.
yeah. I I can see the whole like Jake Lockley being like the internal antagonist, and then we would have like either like Khonshu or um Randall be like an external conflict, so that like they kind of have to fight on two fronts. Um, it could be interesting with Jake, and that's part of why I do want to see more of this to a degree. Is because especially because it was shown in the show that Jake can kind of just take over the body whenever he wants. Like
Mm-hmm.
if he really wants to, he's gonna take it over.
Yeah, like
Um,
every time that the screen would flash like that blackout, That was Jake.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, and so I think it could work in that regard. I just don't know. Maybe I was being a little harsh in saying that I don't want a whole full season. I just would like the season to just be like a little bit snappier, I guess,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
No, I agree. I think we could probably get one more season out of this for sure.
Hmm.
Um, but I really hope that even when the show ends, whenever that is, that we get more of Moon Knight going forward. That's my only that's my only suggestion to Kevin Feige. I just want more Moon Knight in the MCU. I mean, um, and again, this is one of those characters that I would love to see interact with other MCU like big names. Like it's such a drastically different hero amongst all the others that it would be cool to see how Mark and Steven um, play off of like a Hawkeye or a Daredevil or even a Spider-Man because I know that they've had incursions with him as well.
Yeah,
So
I was just thinking it would be so fun just to see a character like Spider-Man or Shang-Chi, like from their perspective, having to like run into Moon Knight and then like they're like duking it out for whatever reason, and then just all of a sudden he's not in a cowl and a hood, he's wearing a three-piece suit, and they're like, "What the is going on?"
yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm dying to see them handle a DID superhero and be like, well, what is going on here?
Okay, so I guess let's close out with how would you rate this show?
Whew, that's a good question. Um, I would say it's definitely top tier Marvel, um, as far as like the MCU goes. Obviously, this isn't, pinnacle of dramatic storytelling or anything, but I think Moon Knight does so much more with character than I think a lot of the MCU is willing to do.
Mm,
Um, for me, this is a good like 9 out of 10 show. I don't think it's like the greatest TV show ever, but there's so much going on in its favor, and it's bold enough as far as these Disney Plus shows to be something memorable within that. Um, and I think, like you said earlier, this is definitely one of those shows that I could easily go back to over and over again if I wanted to. I mean, it's easy to watch. The episode lengths are not super long. Um, I think the most it ever goes is maybe 50 minutes for an episode,
yeah,
but it's the perfect, and I think you talked about this in your review. It's the perfect show to show people who may not be wanting to watch MCU content. Like
yeah,
it's displaced, it's intricate, there's a lot going on, um, and it's such a different route for the MCU and superhero shows in general to go. So, I mean, I'm definitely a film snob, but I highly recommend this. Um, I wish Marvel would do more stuff like this going forward. And hopefully this year, with the few projects that are coming out, we get more creative endeavors with characters like this that are a little more out there, not as well known, but have these interesting backstories and, deeply rooted, like emotional conflicts. It doesn't have to be as bad as like the personal trauma that Mark has in this, but um, I think this is the answer for Marvel going forward.
Yeah, and I agree with a lot of that, especially with it being a very disconnected show. We were talking about earlier about how Phase Four kind of has to be looked at as kind of the Phase One of Marvel now. I would consider this show to be Phase Four's Iron Man 1 in that it's disconnected from everything else. You're not thinking about multiverses, you're not thinking about Infinity Stones, you're not thinking about whatever. It is a very good project to start with to get into the MCU at this point in time. Um and so I I think that the show stands out for that reason, and also because it's very unique from other Marvel projects. We didn't really talk about it that much, but I think what I love about this show as well was not only does it feel like it's different from other Marvel projects, it also looks different.
Mm-hmm.
Like this show had actual color, whereas before the only time that you wouldn't get washed out colors in the MCU was like in Guardians of the Galaxy and Thor Ragnarok.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it's a very unique project to get started with, especially at this point in time after we've had 10 years of Marvel. And if there is a season two, and there is in season two a crossover with another character, I think that, you know, you follow that up with season two, and then Spider-Man shows up, and then someone's like, "Wow, I haven't seen the Tom Holland Spider-Man. Maybe I'll go watch those movies," and then that gets them into Iron Man, and that gets them into Doctor Strange. I think that this show is a very good leaping off point for anybody that is looking to see what Marvel's all about, and or maybe just if they're younger, just never got into it in the first place because they weren't born or something. Um, I would give this show. I gave it an 8 out of 10 in my review, I think,
Okay.
and my review. I base my number of reviews on like how likely I am to watch something again. I probably, I would honestly probably bump it up to a 9.
Mm-hmm.
D-
Yeah, I don't think it's like it's no Breaking Bad or anything like that, but um I think it does wonders for the MCU right now, which I think they really needed a big character win like this, and I'm really pleased with how they handled it.
Yeah, but yeah, I think we can close out on this. This has been the Avian Pictures Show and the Cinema Romantic. I will leave a link to his channel down below. I would highly recommend you check out his channel. His Batman the Animated Series review actually played a big role in me getting into Batman. So go check out his content. And do you have anything to close out with?
No, I'll that's a great way to wrap it up. But yeah, we're hoping to definitely do more collabs like this going forward. Love to be talking. I'm a big kind of art house film guy, so hopefully we can go into more of that stuff here in the future. But I love talking about comic book stuff, and this was a great experience for me.
Yeah. And if we're going to do art house stuff, whenever uh, anywhere and everywhere all at once is like on Netflix or something, I'm definitely
Mm.
gonna watch that, and I'll probably want to do a discussion on it because I like multiverse shit.
Yeah, it is I saw that about a day after I saw Multiverse of Madness, and it is such a high concept like experience of a film. Like it took so long for me to process that. Um, but yeah, we should definitely have a discussion about that. Hope maybe we can even get Eric in on that because I know he's seen it as well and definitely has some thoughts. So
Yeah, yeah, I definitely want to talk about that. All right, we're gonna close out before we
yeah,
go into a rabbit hole. All right, well, everybody, let us know your thoughts on Moon Knight down below, and we will see you all next time.